Court Road, as you know, like Goode Street, along with Goode Street, one of the two nearest stations to University College. So each time he asked for the ticket to Tottenham Court Road, what he was given by whoever was serving the tickets, whoever was given the tickets, when he paid his money, the ticket he was given was to Kensington High Street. Now, this is very depressing and upsetting for a student of phonetics who thought that his English pronunciation was quite good, right? And he told his professor about this, explained the problem he's having, and I'm afraid it was pointed out to him that instead of having the correct stress pattern for a ticket to Tottenham Court Road, right? That's the stress pattern he should have used. Tottenham, actually, usually not even Tottenham, just Tottenham. He was asking for a ticket to Tottenham Court Road. Tottenham Court Road, right? So he got the heavies and the light, the strong to the weak in the wrong relationship. And curiously enough, there aren't very many central stations in London. There are lots in the suburbs, but in the centre there's a small number that people keep going to, like Piccadilly Circus and so on, and Leicester Square. And the one that matched the rhythm that he was applying wrongly to Tottenham Court Road was the one that fitted Kensington High Street. So they didn't listen to his words, they didn't listen to his vowels and consonants, they heard only the rhythm pattern he used, and they gave him the ticket for that rhythm pattern. Well, I don't know whether this story is true or not, but certainly it's a famous story that's been told very many times. Right, another little story. Now this one I vouch for because it is particular to me, right? At one time I taught the University of Tehran, and in the university I had a flat provided, and my next door neighbour was the professor of Indian studies, of Indology, and he's a splendid speaker of English. He spoke English with complete fluency and accuracy and so on, but he did occasionally do some slightly strange things with the stress patterns of English words, right? And I can remember very clearly on one occasion, we were in the middle of a conversation, and he suddenly began the sentence with particularly. Now, when I heard this sentence begin with particularly, I'm afraid I completely failed to recognize the word he was saying. And I was so fascinated by this word that I could not make out. I don't remember what the rest of the sentence was. So that's the problem. If you create a problem when you don't get the stress right, you worry people about what they may have heard that they didn't recognize. Anyway, it soon became clear to me that particularly was, in fact, well, let's put it this way. He was stressing the first syllable of this adverb when he should have been stressing the second one. And if he had just pronounced it with his ordinary Indian accent, which is different from an English accent, if you like, but very comprehensible, if he had got the stress pattern right and simply said particularly, then I could have understood that he was saying the word particularly. But particularly, when he came to say words like categorically, I really had a lot of trouble adjusting to that. So the moral of all this, of course, is you've got to get the stress pattern right, and in words, and you've got to try and get the stress pattern right in sentences. Otherwise, you'll confuse people far more than you will by just not having a proper TH sound or something of that sort. Of course, it's right to make the right sounds all the time, but it's not enough to only get the sounds right. Now, my last lecture today, then, on these maths is partly a look back over what we've been doing before, and partly a sort of illustration of what happens mentally to people who have to face the problem that you are not using the form of the words that they expect. And if you, in fact, don't say an English word in an English way, you distort its pattern of stresses, then this is the kind of thing that happens. What you do is, there's not a vacuum. They don't hear nothing at all. They hear something that, in fact, And this is the automatic psychological thing for a person's mind to do. When they hear strange things, they try and make sense of it. It's just as like when we look at pictures. We try and make sense of a picture. We can see pictures in the fire sometimes. They're not there, of course, but we imagine them because we try to put a construction, in interpretation on what we're seeing or hearing. It's the natural thing to do. Now, when we do this with words we hear, we find that they suggest other words to us. And now what I've done here in this paper is give you a lot of examples of things I've heard that people do with English pronunciation that distort the word slightly, usually in its stressed pattern, but very often in both. And by distorting the word, they produce a suggestion of another word. And I've invented the word for this kind of phenomenon. I call them suggestionisms, right? These are suggestions. Now, look at the first lot. I've given an example of that you might like to, an author I recommend who makes a lot of use of suggestionisms for fun. He gets a lot of humour out of them. That's the author Kingsley Amis. In his, I think, wonderfully funny book, Lucky Jim, that you've probably heard of. He has a lot of suggestionisms representing posh kind of English there, spoken by one of the characters. And in his book that I quote here, in the first paragraph, a book called I Like It Here, not one of his best books, but he there has a British Council lecturer, and the British Council lecturer is questioned by one of the non-native speaking people in the audience at the end of, and he represents in suggested misspellings, if you like, what the person sounds as if they're saying. And I give one example of it. This person says, talks about Ed Crunch, he calls him, A.J. Crowley in the author. She says, do you know this book, Sickies of Sickingdom? Well, of course, this is not Sickies of Sickingdom, not what she was trying to say, the keys of the kingdom. And she had some faults in the pronunciation and some faults in the stress pattern. Anyway, now I'm going to go a little more systematic. There's one example, a little more systematically through the types of things that occur. And the first set I want to warn you about is again a combination of stress and vowel quality. And that is, in the English language, we have one word and one only, which ends in the spelling A, right? And that is the word cinema, right? It ends with the letter A in the spelling. It's the only word which you can either pronounce with the usual value of a final unstressed A, that is schwa, or you can pronounce it R, right? You can either say cinema or cinema. The second pronunciation is much less common, and I don't recommend it to you, but it's not wrong, right? But this does not apply to any other word I know of in the English language, ending in the spelling A or AR. And now I've given some examples of what suggestions are made if you do what you are so fond of doing, I'm afraid, because in your language, I'm sure, English is unique in this way. You see, in your language, I'm sure you have words that end in letter A. They're so common. They're all words borrowed from Latin for names of countries. And when you say them, you do say the R clearly. So here they are, look. If you say Africa, America, Asia, or Jamaica, then this is what we picture in our minds, the spelling out the way you would if you said it. Africa, Africa, America, Asia, Jamaica, Jamaica. and the most astonishing one of all, if you pronounce the name of the country Russia, the USSR, you know, Russia, if you pronounce that and say the R at the end, then you have produced another totally different English word. A very good pronunciation of that word, but not of the word Russia, right? So if you want to know how to pronounce that compound noun that tells you the time of day, early in the morning or late in the afternoon, when everybody is rushing back and forth to work, filling all the transport on the tubes and buses, that is called the rush hour. Right? And if you call it the rush hour, right, then it'll sound most strange, but we do say rush hour. But of course, what I hear from you, if I hear you say rush hour, you're probably talking about this country to the east of Europe. Right? So be careful. And here's some more now. The next little group are some personal names that end in A. Ella, Emma, Jessica, and Julia examples of them. And here are things that I sometimes hear. Ella Fitzgerald, for instance. Well, that's the name of a lady who sings. Her name is not spelled L-R, two separate letters in capitals, right? she's not Ella Fitzgerald, she's Ella Fitzgerald, right? And Emma Bovary, some of you have heard of. Jessie Carr Jones, well, her name is not Jessie, it's Jessica. And Julie R. Jones, her name is not Julie, it's Julia, right? And then we go on. Now, you might have been mystified that I put these on the board yesterday, right? And then didn't refer to them. Now, I put them up again, and they are explanations for the next paragraph. Now, in case you can't spot the words I've got here. But here they are. In the mispronunciations then that I sometimes hear: accommodation, affiliation, anticipation, association, collaboration, determination, examination. I'm not really, honestly, I'm not really suggesting that even as clever as you say it this way, but you might find easily that your pupils have tendency to say it this way. And this is the negotiation. This is the kind of picture that we get. If somebody starts to say the word negotiation and starts it with nego, right? Well, I get a picture of a rhyme with Lego or something. It doesn't seem the same word at all that's beginning to be spoken. So you've got to be rather careful about words of that sort. And it's a very natural thing to do, is to take a word like association and give a full vowel to that first syllable and call it association or association, right? Well, of course, that will sound very wrong to us. There's no ass in it, right? It's schwa. If you make an ass of it, you may make an ass of yourself. That's the trouble. So you have to be very careful. Please watch that you treat those words, find out hardly any of them when they're that long begin with a stressed syllable. They begin with an unstressed syllable that has the schwa vowel in it, the weakest of all vowels, or even nothing at all. Consideration, for instance, I don't really usually say any vowel at all in that. Just go from the k to the consideration. And it's not consideration. Yes, all right. I admit that some of these are rather exaggerations and they're extreme versions, but I do hear things like this. And what funny looking spellings they come out with, don't they, in my mind that I think I'm hearing. So, all right, we go on to some other things besides the... I haven't put them all down, but I put some of them so that you, in case you find difficulty in recognizing them. If there's one you don't recognize and you want me to explain, I can put that one up too, right? But going on to the third group of words, I want to deal with this way. The second was abstract nouns of that sort. The third group are common greetings and inquiries. And I once used to teach in Cambridge, and at the time I had lodgings in a house, and the man who was the master of the house was not a native speaker of English. He was from an Eastern European country. He was very kind and polite gentleman, and he always greeted me every morning with good morning, and things like that. How do you do? Of course, we don't say how do you, but how do you? How do you? Good afternoon, and good afternoon, or good evening. And good evening looks like a name, looks like a double-barreled personal name. Goody is an old-fashioned way of addressing an elderly woman. So good evening. And of course, what is the time? Yes. And then we've got 11 o'clock. 11 o'clock, do you see her? It's another like Ella Fitzgerald, if you like. 11 o'clock, you realise it's 11 o'clock. 11 o'clock. Yes. And it's 7 o'clock. It's 7 o'clock. Right? But this is the picture. If you don't get the stress in the right place, you think, instead of talking about the word 11, right, the number 11, you sound as if you're talking about elephants, right? Not 11 o'clock or elephant o'clock. What is the matter? Some of these, I apologize to the French speakers here, some of these look very French to me, but a lot of people have a lot of problems of this sort. Right, now, the next little paragraph is not chiefly stressed ones. It's ones we've mentioned before when we were talking about the rhythm of the syllable, and we had pre-fortis clippings and so on. So here are pre-fortis reduction failures. People, instead of talking about apple juice and orange juice, they talk about apple juice and orange juice. And you know, sometimes people say to me, they think I have a sense of humour. I don't know where they get the idea from, but anyway, they say that, and they say, "Oh, you must be joking." And I say, no, I'm not joking. My name is Jack, not Joe, and my surname is not King. If you say you must be joking, you must you must surely mean two words, separate words, because if you say joking, you give the word Joe, you see, at the full value, unreduced, unclipped of a separate word. And if you don't clip the O in joking, right, don't clip it as you expect to hear it clip, then we feel that you said a quite different word. So joking is Lee King's brother. And by the way, Lee King, of course, is wrong for leaking. Leaking means the water's running out of the bucket's leaking, right? A very short pre-fortis clipping occurs there, but leaking is not the same thing at all. So you have to watch those and make sure you get the right rhythm for them. And a gruesome sight, well, perhaps you don't all know the word gruesome. The word for horrible, horrid, gruesome, but it corresponds very much with the word. It's got pre-fortis clipping, right? Grues, and it corresponds closely with, in sequence of vowels and consonants with gru followed by some, right? But of course those are two separate words. So that's what it sounds like if you don't make the clipping there. And but for the grace of God, grace of God, yes. Well, there are complicated mistakes go on there, aren't there? Right, now the next one is diphthong reduction. And I'm amazed at a number of people who seem to say, I'm afraid. And I always say, well, I'm a Jack. They say, I'm afraid. What they mean, of course, is, I'm afraid. They mean, I'm afraid. But why in heaven did they think AI? It's a very unusual spelling. The only word in the English language I know that has to have that pronounced with E is the word say. The word past tense of the word say is pronounced said, not saved, right? But all the other words with AID in them, laid and afraid and so on, they have A, they have the diphthong. So be careful with that one, please. And also, here's another example. The person who said this was, you know, Maurice Chevalier, very popular amongst English-speaking people for his beautiful broken English. Maurice Chevalier, he said in the famous film Gigi, he said, I'm glad I'm not young anymore. You know? It's lovely to sit in the shade, you know. Well, to sit here in the shade with none of the words of man and maid. Man and maid. Man and maid. What's a maid? Mediterranean Sea. He meant man and maid. Maid, that's girl, right? That was an old-fashioned word to get but it needed a rhyme. And of course the first one was not shed, not the little wooden house in the back of the garden where you keep the garden tools, right? He didn't mean shed, he meant shade. Shade where the sun is not shining too brightly on, right? But this is a common failure to make a proper diphthong in such words by eliminating the diphthongization that occurs so often in people who don't have diphthongs of that sort in their own language. You can even hear, I even found it rather awful this morning, listening at 6 o'clock to the weather forecast for shipping. I heard that they have an announcer on Radio 4 who has a Scottish accent. And Scottish people don't say vary with number 19s, they say vary, and so she was saying vary and also deleting a yod in the word, so she had this word variable. I should think that it's so unusual in south of England, many people might have been quite puzzled by it. Anyway, there you are. Don't fail to make a diphthong out of afraid, shade, and so on. And there's another diphthong reduction in I'm afraid. Is said by a few people, but they're mainly not of a very popular kind. That's a very small number in the native English word. Right, the last set on this page then are weak syllables made strong, right? So we've got, you know, the famous founder of this department of phonetics here was Daniel Jones. Well, if people call him not Daniel, but make that E in his last syllable into a clear vowel instead of reduction, right? If they actually make an E, then Daniel Jones sounds like as if Danny is his first name and L is his middle name. Or perhaps he's a girl called Danielle. Danielle Jones. And you see the passed on letters? Well, that is actually, they're not the passed on letters, they're the passed on letters. That's a family name. And, well, laboratory, now you'd expect to get laboratory here, we've got labs right alongside us, haven't we? And you're hearing oratory now, so this must be laboratory, not the oratory that goes on in laboratories. But we don't say laboratory, we don't have a clear vowel lab in that first syllable, we say laboratory. Now, when I say we, of course, I don't include the Americans, because the Americans say laboratory, as you know. But we don't say that because we don't have these strong extra syllables at the end. If we said it in our way and stressed the first syllable, we'd be saying laboratory. And of course, you can hear the danger there, can't you? If you say laboratory quite quickly, it might be technical laboratory. So we prefer to say laboratory and have no doubt about it, right? Yes. So, Amen for All Seasons. Do you recognize that one? A Man for All Seasons. There's the famous film and book. Oh, and the familiarity. How often do I hear of this family? People are always using the word familiarity. And instead of saying family with a schwa, right? Familiarity. Yes. Instead of saying familiarity, they say familiarity, and make a clear vowel, fam of the first syllable. Sounds very droll to me. Sounds like some strange family. They sound Irish to me. Arity sounds vaguely an Irish name. Whoever they are, sounds very odd. And there's a lab oratory, yes. And Lord Snowdon, yes, if you don't call him Snowden and have a syllabic M in the last one, then Princess Margaret's former husband, Lord Snowden, will be Lord Snowdon. So, sounds ridiculous. The last one on that page I'm not going to explain. You can discuss it amongst yourselves. Right, and over the page there, you can cross out the very first item because it shouldn't be there, exclamation. But here we have vowel insertions where people are changing the rhythm of a word by putting in a sound because they're making it familiar to themselves in terms of consonant clusters. They're not used to making these clusters, they don't have them in their own language, so any people who don't have such clusters will simplify them and put in extra vowels. It ruins the stress pattern of the word. So you've got, instead of understand, you've got understand. Sounds like 3 words. Instead of speakers of English, you've got speakers of English. Or if you like, yes. Yes, I've got this example here too. It's no very difficult to speak Spanish. Right, and on top of the page on the right there, top of the page, express for express, where the K is gone, exclusion for exclusion. And now, here I have another little story about my time in Tehran. When I was teaching in Tehran, I worked for 2 or 3 years at the University of Tehran. There was an office there where Mr. Smith worked, right? And the speakers of Farsi, the language of Iran, the speakers of this language, Persian, they have differently, as Spanish people do in saying speak. They say speak instead, and similar things. They don't have that kind of cluster. So on one occasion I heard, it was reported to me that somebody rang up the office to ask for this Mr. Smith, and they said, please may I speak to Mr. S. Smith? And the person at the other end of the phone, English speaker, said, I'm sorry, there is no Mr. S. Smith here. He was Mr. B. Smith or Mr. P. Smith, but he wasn't Mr. S. Smith. Because when they heard S. Smith, they thought, couldn't be the person they want. They didn't realize that the S there, the vowel was there, just to make it easy to say the word Smith, and not to imply an initial. Right? Smith is a very common name, so there you are. And I've given other examples of what people do. They not only add extra vowels, but they tend to match up, then assimilate the concept of the following word. So you've got, instead of small, you've got esmol. Instead of snow, you've got esno. Instead of sleep, you've got esleep, for instance. And if anybody knows the 2 words eschatology and scatology, they will be interested to compare them. By the way, speakers who do this, Spanish speakers are particularly fond of it, say instead of calling the USA the United States, they call it the United States. It sounds something very, very different from right. Now the next set is what I call tonic misplacements. And this is moving the main stress of the word. And you can see, well, instead of eloquence, this first figure says eloquence. Instead of, well, now, do you recognize the word periodical? When I first heard it, I heard it in a lecture in London and used by a teacher of English from Finland, actually. She said periodical. And I thought, good heavens, whatever is a periodical? It sounded to me like an Irish pop singer. Irish name being O and periodical, well, what, I didn't. It was the word periodical. Periodical. A journal, I think it comes out after a certain period, like a month or 3 months. Yes, not periodical then. What are these others? Oh yes, her health has weekend, yes. Have you lost something? Now these are typical of so many speakers, particularly French and Spanish speakers, but everybody seems to do this sort of thing. Have you lost something? Like a drink, I love one. Well, don't say that unless you really only want one. And I want you to I want to tell you something. That's quite abnormal. What you really mean is I want to tell you something. We don't stress such words. And you must ask somebody. No, you don't ask somebody. You want to ask somebody. Stress is the word. I blush really to mention this, but because it's perhaps a little unkind. But a lady yesterday was very sweet to me. One of them the court. She came up to me with a box of chocolates, and I very happily took one. And then she said, "Will you have another one?" You know, I knew exactly what she meant, but because she stressed the word one, it could have been taken, had I not realized how charming she was and how she could possibly really meant it, that she was emphasizing that I was only to take one for her. So you mustn't stress the wrong word. I can't find it anywhere. No, we say I can't find it anywhere. These are very strange stressings, so watch them. Yeah. And now misinterpretations of orthography. You know, this is strange. I want to put this one in because I seem to hear. I travel on various airlines from time to time, and I hear these announcements by people who have to know very little English, really, and you think they'd get it right, but they keep on talking about international airlines. Of course, nation, international airline, but of course, being very interested in intonation, it gets me all excited when I compare it. I think there's an airline that really has taken intonation seriously. It's stress, an overstressed airline. And now, the next set is some universities, and you see there's Exeter University, Oxford, this is very Spanish, Oxford University. You know, Spanish speakers are inclined to talk about Oxford Street. Oxford Street, yeah? Oxford Street. And what else have I got here? Oh yes, Bristol, Edinburgh, very French sounding, Edinburgh, and Cambridge, yes, and Essex University, and Reading University, right? I've not only heard Essex University, right, but I've even heard Essex University. When I first heard that, I thought, good heavens, so universities are more and more specializing in particular topics. So I thought, Essex University. Well, what next? So I have to be careful. And then I've got some examples of some well-known politicians in the ways that they start, the people that they seem to be, or the things they seem to be saying, they refer to Mr. Kano, Mrs. Thatcher, Mrs. Thatcher, right? Mrs. Thatcher, Mr. Major, Mr. Macmillan, Mr. Harold Macmillan, Mr. Wilson, and Winston Churchill. Well, I must admit those are extreme, and I don't get anything like that. But I do hear that kind of thing occasionally. And here's some more ordinary names. There's a name called Baxter, for instance. I've heard a person called Baxter, called Mr. Baxter, and I've heard a man called Maddox, referred to as Mr. Maddox, which looks very odd. And when you come to the word exporter, If you've got the word exporter and a person gives the wrong first vowel in that and says exporter, then he is an exporter. Sounds as if he used to carry the bags for people at a railway station. Instead of he's an important man who makes millions for this country by selling televisions abroad or something. Give the wrong impression. It's the children's food, it's the children's food. What awful was there? Very French, isn't it? What awful weather? Very appropriate. What awful was there? What awful weather. A beekeeper, do you know what a beekeeper is? It's a beekeeper. A beekeeper. These are typical of the people who move the stress to the end of the sentence now, which is a favourite habit of French people, as you know. Not a beekeeper, but a keeper of bees. Development. The word is development. No stress on the first syllable, but on the second. Development. One of the most frequently misused words in the English language. God help us. And what a price to pay? Well, a price to pay is a very expensive wig, isn't it? Yes, if you've got no hair, like me. So there you are. What a NSC brandy. It depends. It depends. Yes. Do you recognise Jacques Repair? Jacques Repair? Do you know who that is? Well, I've heard this from French because it's Jack the Ripper. Oh. And that last one you won't know. Riding to Versailles, but I have to tell you about that. I told you just now that I sometimes worked in Cambridge, particularly in the summers, and my favourite way of spending the afternoon, I would teach in the morning. In the afternoon I'd go on the river and punt, my favourite form of locomotion. Very slow, and you push a boat along with a pole, as you know. Anyway, I was at one time punting a young French lady in the boat, and she suddenly turned, looked at the bank and said, "Riding to Versailles!" I had no idea at all what she meant, did I? No. Except that I could look at the notice. And when I looked at the notice, I could see what it said. Morning to Versailles. Morning to bathers. To bathers, the stress on the first syllable, of course, not the, but the. Bathers. In other words, the water was deep there, so people who were bathing, were swimming, were advised to be very careful there. Yeah. Okay, well, the last thing I've got in this lot then is some London localities. Some London localities, some others. Now, I'm sure you can recognise most of these. Baker Street, right? Buckingham Palace, Buckingham Palace, Hammersmith, right? Kensington, King's Cross, Leicester Square, or Leicester Square, yes, Leicester Square, Liverpool Station, Liverpool Street Station, marked Spanish touch there, Marble Arch, Piccadilly, right? Paddington, the Strand, where's that? The Strand, that's right, the Strand. Tottenham Court Road, we've already had it, Tottenham Court Road, Trafalgar Square, Victoria Station, Victoria Station, Waterloo Station, the Lewis Station, the Albert Hall, Buckingham Palace again, back to Buckingham Palace, London University, the changing of cigar, the changing of the guard. St. Pancras Station, St. Pancras Station, the British Museum, the Tower of London, the Tower of London, the Crown Shoots, the Crown Jewels, yeah. The Festival Hall, the Festival Hall, Selfridges, Selfridges. Did you know that Selfridges? Did you know that? That if you write Selfridges, Selfridges, then you've got exactly the same set of phonemes there and there. Selfridges. But if I were to start to transcribe it, the phonemes up to that point would be repeated in the second half. Selfridges. Okay, what have we got to? Oh yes. Other places. Well, Oxford and Cambridge, I'm sure you recognise Oxford and Cambridge. Hampton Court, Canterbury Cathedral, Canterbury Cathedral, Manchester, Birmingham, Basingstoke, anybody guess that? That would be a difficult. Basingstoke, yes? Basingstoke, that's right. Yes. There must be a native speaker of English, I'm sure. Basingstoke, Swindon, Heathrow Airport, Gatwick, Stanstead, another airport, Stansted. Keenestone upon Knoll, Kingston upon Hull, Sheffield Wednesday, the football team, of course. Leeds United, Tottenham Hotspur, or the other version, Tottenham Hotspur. Okay, well, I hope the point's been well and truly made there. And I wonder if anybody got any question now on what I've been saying, any further, anything anybody likes to bring up. At this point, what I could do is change tack completely and ask you if you would like to hear what any other kind of accent of English sounds like. It's a rather foolhardy thing to do, but are you interested in that? We've got 5 minutes and I'm finished. Do you want to hear what any other accent of English sounds like? Yes. Will you tell me the place and I'll see if I can give you an example of it?
Northern accent.
Where?
Northern accent.
Northern. Yeah. Well, there are all sorts of kinds of Northern English, various kinds. Yeah. Geordie is more difficult. Man, Geordies in the northeast of England, they have very difficult accent to imitate there. Oh, yeah, they've got funny intonation in Geordie land. They say, who you getting on? Who's your feather? Who you getting on? How you getting on? Who's your feather? There's a strong dialect. How's your father? Very old-fashioned speakers do that now. The modern ones, of course, don't do it so much. But that's typical of Geordie land. Yes? Any other?
Scottish.
Which Scottish do you want, lady? There's all types of Scottish. But that's something like a Glaswegian, you know, most famous of all, not very popular, the Glaswegian. There was a story about a Glaswegian lady telling her friend about how it was her birthday, and she asked her, is your husband giving you anything? Hen, is your husband giving you a present today? He said, no. I wanted some scent, but I wouldn't trust him to bring it home. In other words, they drink everything in sight in Glasgow, especially whiskey, of course, but she wouldn't trust him to buy a bottle of scent because he might drink it on the way home. Where?
Birmingham.
I couldn't catch that one.
Birmingham.
Birmingham? Yeah, I want to hear Birmingham. What I want to hear Birmingham for? Birmingham people talk a bit like this. Birmingham. You've been to Birmingham. You live in Birmingham. When you go back to Birmingham, you go yam. You go in yam, they say. Now, this is, shall we say, not exactly standard Birmingham, but it's typical of the more unsophisticated Birmingham from speaker. Cornish, my dear. Well, I was in Cornwall myself not very long ago. It's a lovely part of the world.
How about Irish?
Irish? Which Irish do you want? There's so many different kinds of Irish. Is it Southern Irish or Northern Irish you want? Do you want Northern Irish? Do you want Ulster, man?
No.
East Anglia.
East Anglia. No, you want East Anglia, you've got a different sort of accent there. Like if you go to Swartham, something like that bar, and you have people with this sort of rhythm, but you're different, yeah. Where?
Aristocrats.
Oh, idea, what sort of aristocrat you want, you know? The royal family. Do you want the Queen? Do you want the dear Queen? I have great pleasure in declaring this public lavatory open. May God save her and all who sit in her. You know, she's always launching battleships, obsolete battleships, the Queen is doing, yes. But the other members of the royal family are different. See, Charles, for instance, her son, very different. He's famous for saying, going out and about around the town. But Anne is different again. You know, she has more. She went to a girls' school that was rather smart. So
what about the Prime Minister? What kind of English is he speaking?
Well, he's speaking London English with perhaps a slight touch of Kent about it. I was just saying to my group this morning, the one startling thing about John Major's accent is that he has what is apparently a Kentish vowel. I don't know if he's got it wrong because he doesn't really come from Kent, but it's only there that they apparently say, instead of saying want, they say want. So he tells us all the time what he wants for the country. And this sounds very strange to us because I know no educated person in the whole of the West English-speaking world who says want for want. So there you are. Rhymes with front, you see. Very strange. Otherwise, he's rather ordinary Cockney. You know, he doesn't sound very aristocratic or educated. He's very plain spoken, that sort of thing. You know, a light Cockney, you might call it.
New City Talk.
Sorry, I couldn't catch that one.
New City Talk.
New York City?
No, City Talk.
City Talk?
Yeah.
Well, there isn't a city accent because nobody's brought up in the city, unless you mean very strong Cockney, old-fashioned Cockney, a better boy sort of thing like that, you know, the old-fashioned Cockney. Well, you heard that yesterday of John Wells, didn't he? Told you all about that. You know all about it already, don't you? Yeah.
Well, I heard that the high flyers in the city...
oh, my dear chap, high flyers instead of just aristocratic.
Yeah.
They just talk beautifully, you see. You know, they've been to the very past public schools, like Eton and Harrow and so on, so they have that sort of accent, if you're lucky, you know. Liverpool? Did you go to school in Liverpool like the Beatles did? Oh. If you go to Liverpool, they say, hello, whack, how you getting on? Whack is the term for it. How you getting? Hello, whack. Do you like that Judy there with the fur hair? The girl with the fair hair? The Judy with the fur hair over there? Yeah. Liverpool. Oh dear, oh dear.
What about the reporters on television? What kind of English?
There's hundreds of different kinds. Yeah, very
but
different.
they're standard.
There isn't a uniformity anyway. Couldn't give you one. No. Anyway, I'm afraid my time's run out. So thank you very much for being with us.